Okay, first off, sorry, this is on my phone, so it's going to be a bit more shaking stuff. But here we have the DM870 bolt, and how I removed what you call the nut and I call it bushing. I actually don't know where my original one is. So that sits in here. We can see that the front end is dimpled. That's because they took basically something like this, just a center punch. So the bushing is a press fit. So basically, like this, they had it sitting on a surface and they pushed a bushing on. Here we have a firing pin and bushing from the CAM 870 series. I'll talk more about that later. But they pushed it on and then they took the center punch and hit it, which caused the end of it to flare a very little, and that's what makes it hard to push back out of the bushing. So really the best tool for that is, one second, it's going to be a pin punch, which is a useful tool for working on airsoft stuff anyhow. So it's just basically a cylinder designed to be hit with a hammer. And what you want to do is set the back face of your bolt. Here I use a vise. You could use blocks of wood, anything like that. So basically we want it so the firing pin here can move freely. And then you're just going to center your pin punch on the core of the firing pin, and you should be able to force it back out. And that's how you remove it from the bushing, because the bushing will sit inside the bolt frame, and that will stop it from moving backward. That's what it's supposed to do. And then you can push the firing pin out that way. So once you have that done, now you have a firing pin that's small enough that it can hit the bottom of your APS shells. However, what we're missing now is something to stop the pin from backing all the way out of the bolt due to this spring. Now I had a couple thoughts on this, and maybe you've already noticed the route that I took, but one was to use an APS firing pin. However, with the APS firing pin, they have this collar thing, which is sort of similar to the bushing, but it's designed so, you can't fire a real shell or whatever, because this would stop the firing pin from hitting the primer. And here on the backs of the APS shells, there's a little collar for that to sit into. But if we look on our bolt here, this guy, A, sits loose, and B, it's bigger around than this hole is. Now, here I had really two options. I could go and use the APS pin and the APS bushing for it and modify and drill this out. I believe too you would need to reduce the diameter of this shelf here. Just slightly make that that guy there, so it could fit through the back. But what I ended up doing is I modified the firing pin, the DM870 firing pin that's in here. And if we see, I've drilled one hole so it should bisect the hole that the firing pin goes through. All right, which is like this. So basically we have the hole and there's a roll pin in there. You can find roll pins at most hardware stores, so that it can slide forward and the spring will push it back and it'll stop. And then the roll pin also keeps it in a rotational alignment, and that will keep it centered without needing to use the bushing or the nut on the front. So that's what I did. And two, if you're going to do that, definitely recommend a good drill bit, because this is a giant chunk of steel. Go slowly and do that first, and then cut the groove in your firing pin. Because in the event that you get it slightly off-center or slightly askew, it's just easier to correct it after the fact than have cut this wrong and have it not work with the hole you made. But yeah, alternatively to option number 3 is you could use some sort of a shorter bushing. Now I believe their existing bushing sort of relies on having the top here flared a bit by hitting it with a center punch. You could potentially cut that bushing in half once you remove it and re-put it on the pin, basically. So if normally it's the full length of this cavity up here. So if you cut it to half length, even when our firing pin is out, it would sit flush. And then it would hold the pin in theory, but not stop you from detonating the shell or triggering the shell. So that's what I did, and I think most importantly that's how I removed the firing pin. And the tip for the barrel, I think I showed that, was you're going to need a lot of force for the barrel nut. Alternatively, I'll re-explain real quick what's going on under here. So if you happen to know, or somebody who has, or if you have access to welding, you could potentially also remove these welds. So what is underneath this is like an access port into the barrel. So they drilled a hole in the barrel, they slid the bushing into the barrel, and then they tack welded it. So kind of depending on how good they tack weld it into the barrel depends on how much force you'll need to apply to get it out. Mine was quite a lot. And down here I've inserted a small grub screw with Teflon tape, or I use some RTV silicone. That's just to help create a better air seal in there. I don't know if it's entirely necessary, but I figured I'd show that because I don't remember if that was in the video or not. Anyhow, I hope this has been slightly helpful, and I think it's easier to explain via video than via text. Thanks.